She'd never been kissed, never chosen, never even noticed. But all that changed when the city's most powerful man walked into her quiet world and saw what no one else had ever seen. Emma Callahan loved the quiet, the way early morning light trickled through the bookstore windows and danced on the pages of old novels, the rustle of paperbacks being sorted, the faint classical music playing overhead, and the smell of roasted espresso wafting from the cafe next door. This was her sanctuary, her world. At 24, Emma lived a life most would consider simple. She wasn't famous, she wasn't rich. She didn't wear the latest designer clothes or post curated selfies on social media. In fact, most days, she barely remembered to brush her hair before tying it into a loose bun and heading out the door. Tote bag on shoulder, worn-out sneakers on her feet, a book always tucked under her arm. She worked at Whisper and Quill, a little independent bookstore, nestled between a vegan bakery and an antique shop on a quiet street in San Francisco's historic Mission District. Every day, Emma opened the shop at 8 a.m. sharp, swept the hardwood floors, and carefully arranged the staff picks display like it was her personal gallery. Her co-workers adored her. Her boss, a sweet woman named Maureen, often said, "If my bookstore had a soul, Emma, it would be you." But what none of them knew, not even Sophie, her cheerful roommate and lifelong best friend, was that Emma Callahan had never been kissed. Not once. Not in middle school, not during her high school prom, not even during her brief time at college, where she quietly faded into the background while others lived loud and messy and heartbreak-filled lives. It wasn't that she didn't want to be kissed. It was just, she was waiting, not for some fairy tale, but for someone who truly saw her. Not just the girl with soft brown eyes and a heart full of old poetry, but the real her, awkward, quiet, unsure, and unremarkable in a world full of shining stars. And then he walked in. It was a rainy Tuesday morning when the bookstore door chimed. Emma looked up from the register and froze. He was soaked, holding a dripping umbrella in one hand and a phone in the other. But even in wet shoes and a wrinkled white shirt, he looked like he belonged on a magazine cover. Sharp cheekbones, tall, charcoal gray eyes that flicked across the store like he was analyzing every shelf at once. A subtle confidence radiated off him. People like him didn't come here. People like him didn't see girls like Emma. Until his eyes met hers. He paused. Put his phone down and smiled. "Hi, I'm looking for a book," he said. His voice was deep, but not intimidating. Emma blinked. Sure. What kind of book?" He scratched the back of his head. "Something that doesn't make me feel like my entire life is about quarterly reports and shareholders. Something real." Emma tilted her head. That wasn't the answer she expected. "Follow me." She led him to the back, to a hidden section of memoirs, poetry, and underappreciated modern classics. He watched her with curiosity as she ran her fingers along the spines, before pulling out a worn copy of Tuesdays with Morrie. "This might help," she said quietly. "It made me cry, but in a good way." He studied the cover, then her face. "Are you always this honest?" "I guess so," she smiled, half embarrassed. "I'm Daniel," he said, holding out a hand. She hesitated, not out of shyness, but because she knew that name. Daniel Cole, the youngest billionaire CEO in California, real estate mogul, tech investor, boardrooms, billion-dollar mergers. The same Daniel Cole whose face was all over Forbes last month, and he was standing in her bookstore, in her quiet world, asking her for a book that felt real. Emma took his hand and shook it, gently. "Emma, I work here. I can tell." He glanced around. "It suits you." After Daniel left, with 3 books. Not just one. Emma stood frozen behind the counter, heartbeat fluttering. She didn't dare tell Sophie that night. It didn't feel real enough to say out loud. Over the next 2 weeks, he came back, again and again, sometimes to buy a book, sometimes to ask her opinion. Once, he brought her a coffee and said, "I figured, you probably never get a break." Emma had never met someone so confident yet so genuine. And the strangest thing, he didn't treat her like she was invisible. He listened when she spoke. He remembered her favorite authors. He once stayed for 30 minutes talking about a novel she loved. and actually read it the next day. But Emma still kept her guard up. Because men like him don't date women like her. Because people like her don't get chosen. It was a Friday evening when it happened. The rain returned, heavier this time, and the bookstore was closing. Emma was about to lock the door when Daniel rushed in, dripping and breathless. "Sorry, can I stay for a minute?" he asked. Of course. He stepped inside, took off his coat, and looked around like it was the only place he could breathe. Then he turned to her. "I just came from a meeting where I was offered a merger that could double my company's worth, and I walked out of it because I realized I don't want more money. I want meaning." Emma didn't say anything. He continued. "Everyone in my world plays a role. They pretend. They expect. But you're not pretending. You care. You live. You make people feel something." She looked down, flustered. "I'm just a bookstore clerk." "No, you're the realest person I've met in years." He stepped closer. "And you've never been kissed, have you?" Emma froze. Her eyes welled up. "How did you?" "I guessed, and I didn't say it to embarrass you. I said it because if I ever get the chance to kiss someone like you, I want to earn it." The air between them changed, soft, intense. Emma couldn't breathe. And Daniel, the billionaire CEO who could have anyone in the world, looked at her like she was the most extraordinary person he had ever met. He didn't kiss her that night. He simply touched her hand and whispered, "Next time, if you'll let me." But that one moment shattered the walls Emma had built her whole life, and nothing would ever be the same again. Emma barely slept that night. Her tiny apartment felt different, brighter, louder, like the silence had somehow been stirred by what Daniel had said. His voice echoed in her ears. "If I ever get the chance to kiss someone like you, I want to earn it." What did that even mean? She'd always been careful not to read too much into things. Life had taught her that real feelings, the kind that existed in books and poems, weren't always returned in reality. So she tucked that moment into her heart like she did with her favorite lines of poetry, beautiful, fleeting, and probably not meant for her. Still, she couldn't forget the way he looked at her. It wasn't just admiration. It was like he was searching for something in her, something real, that even she hadn't noticed about herself. The kind of look that left you wondering whether you had been living too small all along. By the time the morning sun cast its golden light across her windowsill, Emma had told herself she needed to move on. Daniel Cole belonged to a world so far from hers, it might as well be another galaxy. But life doesn't always wait for us to catch up. That afternoon, while arranging a new stack of poetry books near the back of the store, she heard a soft knock on the glass door. She turned, heart skipping. It wasn't Daniel. It was a woman, tall, poised, and elegant, dressed in a navy blue skirt suit, holding a silver envelope. Her presence alone made the bookstore feel suddenly small. "Are you Emma Callahan?" the woman asked. Emma hesitated. "Yes." The woman handed her the envelope, nodded politely, and left without another word. Emma looked down at the envelope. Her name was written in crisp, neat handwriting. Inside was a card, thick, smooth, expensive, and a single line. "Please join me for dinner tonight, 7 p.m. I'd like to show you my world." "Daniel." She stared at it for a full minute before whispering, "This can't be real." Her heart raced. What would she even wear? Was this a joke? Did he really mean her? When Sophie came home that evening and saw Emma standing in front of her closet, frozen, holding the same 3 dresses she always wore to book fairs, her friend nearly screamed, "I knew it. I knew something was going on." "Spill it." Emma shook her head. "It's nothing." "I mean, it's probably nothing, Emma," Sophie said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Nothing doesn't come in an envelope delivered by someone who looks like a Vogue editor." Emma tried to smile, but the truth was she was terrified. What if she didn't belong? What if this dinner wasn't about her at all, but just a kind gesture from someone who felt sorry for the quiet girl at the bookstore? But a small part of her quiet but growing whispered that maybe, just maybe, she was worth the invitation. That maybe, for once, she didn't need to hide behind stories. Maybe this was the start of her own. When she arrived at the address written on the card, her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't a restaurant. It was a rooftop garden, stunning, glowing with fairy lights and soft jazz playing from hidden Speakers, the entire skyline of San Francisco stretched around her in golden hues. And there he was. Daniel stood by a table, dressed simply in a dark blazer and white shirt, holding two cups of something warm. When he saw her, he smiled, not the confident kind she'd seen in magazines, but the one she'd learned to recognize in their quiet moments. "Hot chocolate," he said, handing her a cup. "Thought you might prefer it over wine." She blinked, surprised. "How did you know? I listen," he said softly. They sat, they talked, about books, childhoods, fears. He told her about the pressure of boardrooms, the loneliness of leadership, how easy it was to feel surrounded by people and still be completely alone. She told him about her parents, about being the invisible girl, about her love for stories, because they made her feel less alone. At one point, Daniel grew quiet. "I never tell anyone these things," he said. Emma sipped her drink and asked, "Why me?" "Because you're not trying to impress me. You're not playing a game." He looked down, then met her eyes. "And I'm tired of people who only love the version of me they see in articles." She didn't know what to say. No one had ever chosen her like this before, not for her mind, or her kindness, or her way of quietly seeing the world. He stood, then offered his hand. "Come. I want to show you something." She followed him to the edge of the rooftop where a telescope had been set up. "My mother loved the stars," he said. "She always told me the best things in life weren't the loudest or the brightest. They were the ones that stayed, quietly, just out of reach." Emma leaned in, looked through the telescope, and gasped. A comet streaked across the sky, its trail shimmering like silver thread across velvet. She stepped back, eyes wide. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "So are you," Daniel replied. Without hesitation, Emma turned to him, stunned. He stepped closer but didn't touch her. Instead, he simply said, "I wanted you to see what I see. Because tonight, I didn't want you to think of yourself as the girl who's never been kissed. I wanted you to feel like the girl who could change someone's life." The wind stirred her hair, and in that quiet space, something inside her began to shift. The walls she'd built, the doubts she'd nurtured for years, they didn't all fall at once, but one brick, one single brick, loosened. Daniel didn't try to kiss her. He simply reached out, and without a word, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers brushed her cheek like it was the most fragile part of the universe. No expectations, no pressure. Just presence, just seeing her fully, clearly, and without judgment. When she went home that night, she didn't cry like she thought she would. She sat by the window with her tea, stared at the stars, and whispered, "Maybe I do belong somewhere. Maybe someone saw me after all." She wasn't in love, not yet, but for the first time in her life, she wasn't invisible, and that was the beginning of something she never thought she'd feel: hope. The bookstore felt different the next morning. Emma moved through the shelves like she always did, carefully straightening displays, brushing dust from the corners of well-loved novels, humming a quiet tune under her breath. But something inside her had changed. She was still the same Emma, still wore cardigans too big for her frame, still packed her lunch in a floral tote bag, still scribbled notes in the margins of her favorite poetry book. But there was a lightness now, a new warmth that followed her every movement. People noticed. Mrs. Langley, the elderly woman who came in every Thursday for a mystery novel, smiled and said, "Something about you today. You look brighter, dear." Emma didn't know how to respond. How could she explain that just last night, someone had made her feel like the most valuable person in a city full of people? She tried not to think about Daniel too much. She didn't want to fall into a fantasy. But his voice, his kindness, his quiet understanding, it stayed with her like the memory of a dream that felt too real to forget. By mid-afternoon, she was shelving books near the children's section when Sophie stormed into the store, breathless. "You're on the internet," she blurted. Emma dropped a book. "What?" Sophie shoved her phone into Emma's hand. A photo filled the screen. Daniel, standing beside her on the rooftop, holding her hand. Someone must have taken it from another building. The headline read, "Is billionaire CEO Daniel Cole dating a bookstore girl?" Emma's stomach dropped. People in the comments were already speculating about her. Some praised her quiet beauty. Others weren't so kind. "Who even is she?" She looks average. She's not even his type average. That word stung in a way she hadn't expected. For a moment, the world felt loud again. Maureen came over and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "You okay, sweetheart?" Emma nodded quickly, but her throat felt tight. She managed to get through the rest of her shift, but she didn't feel like herself. Not anymore. By the time she got home, her phone had over a dozen missed calls from Daniel. She stared at his name on the screen, heart pounding, when she finally picked up. His voice came through, calm but worried. "I'm so sorry," he said. "I didn't know someone took that photo." "If I had known," Emma interrupted softly. "It's not your fault. I'm not used to being looked at like this." Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Do you want to disappear? For a little while?" "What?" "Not forever. Just come with me somewhere quiet. Somewhere no one knows us." Emma hesitated. She didn't do spontaneous. She planned. She prepared. But something about his voice's sincerity calmed her. She found herself saying, "Where?" "Carmel by the sea." He replied, "Tomorrow morning. I'll pick you up at 8. Just pack light." When she hung up, Sophie was already standing in the doorway, arms crossed, grinning. "You're going, right?" Emma's cheeks flushed. "I think I am." Sophie stepped forward and hugged her tightly. "Just promise me something." "What?" "No matter what happens, don't shrink back into yourself. Don't let this scare you back into the shadows." Emma didn't answer right away, but in her heart, she made a quiet promise. The next morning, the ocean wind greeted her like an old friend. Daniel drove a simple car, no limos, no assistants, no trace of the billionaire she'd seen on magazine covers. They talked the entire drive, laughed, listened to old songs on the radio, and when they arrived at the tiny seaside cottage he'd booked, Emma was stunned by how ordinary and perfect everything felt. There were no cameras, no photographers, no headlines. Just the sound of waves, the scent of salt, and Daniel making breakfast in a hoodie that said Stanford Dropout Club. They spent the day walking barefoot along the shore, building sandcastles like children, sitting on driftwood and sharing stories neither of them had ever told another soul. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in streaks of orange and gold, Daniel turned to her and said, "You don't know how rare you are." Emma looked at him, uncertain. "I mean it," he continued. "You're not trying to be anything. You're just a real. That's why I keep showing up. Not because I need a break from my world, but because I need you in it." Emma felt something shift in her again. This time, it wasn't fear or self-doubt. It was a quiet, steady kind of courage. She stood up and walked closer to the edge of the rocks, where the waves gently lapped at her shoes. She looked out at the horizon and whispered, "You know what's funny?" "What?" he asked, joining her. "I used to think I wasn't made for love. Like maybe some people just go through life never being chosen. But I think I was wrong." He didn't say anything. He just looked at her like she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. And then, slowly, he reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. She didn't flinch. Because in that moment, she realized something more powerful than anything she'd ever read in a book. Being chosen isn't about being perfect. It's about being seen. Truly, deeply seen. And for the first time in her life, she believed she was worth seeing. That night, they sat beneath the stars, wrapped in a shared silence that didn't need to be filled with words. And though he still hadn't kissed her, Emma didn't mind. Because for the first time, she didn't feel like the girl waiting for her story to begin. She felt like the girl already living it. People say you don't realize a moment is life-changing until after it's past, but Emma knew. She felt it in the hush of that night, sitting on the porch of a quiet cottage by the sea, her fingers interlaced with Daniel's beneath a blanket. The sky above was scattered with stars, and the sound of waves crashing against the rocks felt like a lullaby meant just for them. She wasn't used to feeling this close to someone. Not physically, not emotionally. Her heart beat differently now, slower, fuller, like it was learning a new rhythm. He hadn't kissed her yet, and strangely, she didn't mind. The way he looked at her, listened to her, sat with her in silence, it was more intimate than anything she'd ever imagined. It made her feel safe in a way that frightened her, because she didn't know what came next. The next morning, as they sat together watching seagulls sweep across the water. Daniel's phone rang. He didn't answer, but a few minutes later, it rang again and again. Eventually, he stood, stepped away, and took the call. Emma watched him from the distance. She couldn't hear what was being said, but she saw the change. His posture stiffened, his jaw clenched. He paced. His hand ran through his hair in that way she'd only seen once before. When he'd talked about the loneliness of being at the top. When he returned, his smile was there, but not the same. She didn't press. She didn't need to. That night, after dinner, he finally spoke. "There's something I didn't tell you." Emma looked up. "I didn't plan on falling into you. You were supposed to be a break, a breath of fresh air." She nodded slowly, her chest tightening. "But you're more than that. You're honest. You see through things, and I'm scared of that." He looked away, down at his hands. "There's a deal one I've been negotiating for months. It's complicated, and it requires me to go back, to focus, to become the version of myself I never wanted to be again, the version that wins at all costs." Emma stayed quiet. He met her eyes. "If I take it, I'm not sure there will be space for this. For you." The words landed softly, but sharply. She didn't cry. She didn't panic. Instead, she stood and stepped closer to him. "I never asked you to stay," she said gently, "but I hoped you'd want to." Daniel took a breath, one hand brushing her arm. "I do want to." "Then why are you trying to walk away from the one part of your life that feels real?" He looked at her like she'd just read a line from a book he didn't know he needed. She continued, quieter now, but with more strength than she knew she had. "I've spent most of my life believing I wasn't enough, that I didn't belong in the stories other people lived. You made me feel different. You made me feel seen." He opened his mouth to respond, but she stopped him with a raised hand. "I don't need a fairy tale, Daniel. I just want something honest. I want to be chosen not because I'm an escape, but because I'm worth staying for." There was a long pause. Then he stepped forward, just a breath away from her. His hand reached up, slowly, brushing a tear she didn't realize had fallen. And in the silence of that moment, under a sky full of stars and unspoken feelings, he whispered, "You are." But before he could lean in, before that long-awaited kiss could happen, his phone buzzed again. And this time, he looked out. Emma stepped back. Something in her understood. There was a choice to be made, and it wasn't hers to make. She didn't ask for promises. She didn't plead. Instead, the next morning, she packed her things, left a note on the kitchen table, and walked out before the sun rose. The note was simple. "Thank you for seeing me. I hope you choose something real." She didn't leave because she gave up. She left because, for the first time, she understood her own worth. And sometimes, knowing your value means walking away before someone else figures it out too late. As she boarded the train back to San Francisco, her reflection stared back at her in the glass. She looked the same, but she knew she wasn't. She was no longer the girl who had never been kissed. She was the girl who had finally been seen. And if he didn't come back for her, she would still be whole. Because loving yourself truly, loving yourself is the beginning of every great story, even the ones with unexpected endings. It's strange how silence can be louder than any goodbye. The bookstore smelled like cinnamon and ink again, like nothing had ever happened. The world kept spinning. People still came in, asked for novels, sipped coffee next door, and complimented Emma's staff recommendations like they always had. But inside, something in her had shifted. Emma had returned from that seaside cottage changed, not heartbroken but widened, as if life had gently pulled open a door she never knew existed. And though it hurt to see it close, she was grateful she'd been allowed to walk through it. She didn't expect to hear from Daniel again. Not really. Not after she saw the news. His face was all over the internet 2 days later, standing in front of a marble podium, confident, crisp suit, press around him like a wall of flashing lights. He'd signed the merger. The billion-dollar deal had gone through. And beside him was someone else. Her name was Vanessa Langford, an investment heiress, graceful, poised, flawless in the way people on magazine covers always seemed to be. They didn't look in love, but they looked like they belonged on the same page. Emma closed her laptop quietly and stared out the window for a long time, not in anger, But in something quieter than that, a strange kind of understanding. Daniel had chosen his world, and she had chosen hers. But just because a story doesn't end the way you want doesn't mean it wasn't worth telling. In the following weeks, Emma began to pour herself into the bookstore in a way she never had before. She started a Letters to the Lonely project, an idea she'd long tucked away but never acted on. Customers could write anonymous letters of encouragement and tuck them into random books for strangers to find. She left the first one herself, inside a copy of The Little Prince. To whoever needs this, you are not too quiet to be heard, and not too small to be seen. Word spread, the community joined in. Letters began popping up everywhere, in memoirs, in cookbooks, even in thrillers. A quiet movement of kindness. One afternoon, a woman came in holding a letter with tears in her eyes. She didn't say a word, just hugged Emma tightly and whispered, "Thank you." Emma smiled, blinking back tears of her own. She was still the girl who had never been kissed. But now, she was also the girl changing lives in ways no one saw coming. And then came the package. It arrived late one rainy Tuesday, just before closing. A small box wrapped in brown paper. No return address. Inside was a book, Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman. But it wasn't one from their shelves. This copy was old, soft with age. And inside, in the margin of a dog-eared page, a note had been written in familiar handwriting. "You told me once you liked words that linger. This one lingered with me." Emma's breath caught. She ran her fingers across the cover like it might disappear. He hadn't forgotten, and just as she closed the book, something slipped out from between the pages. A photograph. The rooftop. That night. Her laughing. Wind in her hair. Candlelight on her face. The picture hadn't been taken by the press. It had been taken by him. There was another note tucked behind it, scribbled in a rush. "I looked back and you were gone. I understand why. But now I look for you in every room and you're never there. And suddenly the world doesn't feel big enough without you in it." Emma's heart was pounding. But there was no contact information. No phone number. Just that. A memory, a confession, a maybe. She didn't know what to do with it, so she put the book on her nightstand right next to her journal and tried to breathe through the storm of emotions that followed. 3 days later, she found herself walking through the city at dusk. No destination, just movement. She passed bookstores, parks, coffee shops. Everything reminded her of the man who had seen her when she didn't even believe she could be seen. And then something unexpected happened. Outside a small art gallery tucked between a florist and a jazz club, a poster caught her eye. The Real Stories exhibit, a showcase of moments that changed lives. She almost walked past it, but something made her stop. Inside, the gallery was quiet. Warm light spilled across canvases and photographs. But it was the final display that made her legs feel like air. A single photo of her on the rooftop. Next to it, a handwritten caption. She reminded me that quiet does not mean invisible. That sometimes the people who speak the softest leave the loudest echoes. Tears stung her eyes. And when she turned around, he was standing there. Not in a suit, not with a crowd, just Daniel. Hands in his pockets, tired eyes, hopeful smile. "I didn't know if you'd come," he said softly. Emma wiped a tear away, too stunned to speak. He walked closer, slowly, like he was afraid she'd disappear. "I wanted the world," he said. "I thought that meant more power, more control. But then I realized the world without you in it doesn't feel real anymore." She didn't reply right away. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't awkward. It was heavy, honest. And then she whispered, "Why now?" He looked down, then up. "Because I had to lose the deal to understand what I'd almost lost with it." Emma blinked. "You didn't sign it." "I walked away last week," he said, voice barely steady. "Too many compromises. Too many pieces of me left behind. I want something real, Emma. Not just someone to sit beside me at events. I want someone to build a life with." A beat. And then he said it. "I want you, if you still want me." Emma's heart, bruised and cautious, beat wildly. She stepped forward, her eyes searching his. "I never needed you to give me the world, Daniel. I just needed to know I had a place in yours." And in that moment, he leaned in. No pressure, no expectations, just a quiet, honest closeness. And finally, gently, like a promise kept after 1,000 quiet pages, he kissed her. Not like in the stories, but like something real. And for the first time, Emma didn't feel like she was living in someone else's fairy tale. She was finally writing her own. Asterisk, not all love stories begin with fireworks. Some begin with a whisper, a glance, a quiet girl shelving books who never believed her story would matter. But when the heart has been silent for too long, even the softest music can feel like a symphony. The world didn't change overnight for Emma. There were no headlines, no viral videos, no dramatic proposals in the middle of crowded streets. What changed was something deeper, quieter. Daniel started showing up at the bookstore every Saturday afternoon, usually with a coffee from Sophie next door and a warm, sheepish smile that made the regulars nudge Emma behind the counter. At first, he'd just browse. Then he'd help alphabetize the fiction shelf. One time, he even stayed past closing to mop the floor after a leak from the ceiling. "I used to think running a company was complicated," he told her once, rolling up his sleeves. "But have you ever tried organizing a poetry section after a school field trip?" Emma laughed, and something settled in her chest, something that had been floating for years. They didn't rush into labels. There were no sudden declarations or promises carved in stone. Just consistency, and kindness, and moments that stitched together something neither of them had ever truly known home. Emma began writing again. She hadn't touched her old journal in months, but now the pages filled effortlessly. Poems, letters she'd never send, reflections about the past and quiet hopes for the future. It wasn't about becoming published. It was about finally giving her heart a place to speak. Daniel read every word, and sometimes cried openly when he reached the ones about her childhood loneliness, her invisible years, her first heartbreak, silent and unnoticed. "I wish I'd known you then," he said once, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I'm glad you didn't," she replied with a smile, "because I wouldn't have been ready to meet you." As the seasons changed, so did they. Daniel stepped down from his CEO position not out of rebellion, but out of freedom. He passed the company to someone he trusted and began working with a foundation that brought literature and arts to underserved schools across Oregon. "Turns out," he said during one of their quiet Sunday walks, "there are more kinds of power than the kind I used to chase." Emma didn't need grand gestures, but one morning, he showed her a classroom in a tiny coastal town where her donated books lined the shelves, and her letter-writing project had inspired an entire wall of messages between students. "Isn't this where you grew up?" he asked, squeezing her hand. She nodded slowly, eyes wide with disbelief. They were in Cannon Beach, where it all began, where she was once the girl no one noticed. She wandered into her old library later that day and found a young girl tucked into a beanbag chair, reading Anne of Green Gables. Emma smiled and walked over. "That one's one of my favorites." The girl looked up, blinking. "Mine too. I want to be a writer someday." Emma crouched beside her. "Then you will be. Just don't wait for permission." It was like looking into a mirror from a decade ago, and as they left the town behind that afternoon, Daniel turned to her in the car and asked softly, "What do you want your next chapter to be?" Emma looked out at the ocean, thoughtful. "I think I want to write a book," she whispered. "About what?" She turned to him, green eyes full of something new, certainty. About the girl who thought she was invisible, and the world she discovered when she finally let herself be seen. He smiled. "I'd read that 100 times. Emma's studio apartment eventually became too small for their growing collection of books, plants, and dreams, so they moved into a quaint two-bedroom cottage not far from the bookstore, with creaky wooden floors and a sunroom that smelled like lavender and paper. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't grand, but it was theirs. One evening, as the sky turned a quiet shade of pink, Emma stood in the kitchen making tea while Daniel leaned against the doorframe watching her. "You know," he said softly, "the first time I saw you, I thought I'd never met anyone so peaceful." Emma turned, her smile gentle. "And now I know," he said, stepping closer. "That peace wasn't stillness. It was strength I didn't understand yet." She reached for his hand. "I used to be afraid I'd never be chosen," she said quietly, "that I'd always just be someone people passed by, Daniel squeezed her fingers. You were never waiting to be chosen, Emma. You were always just waiting to choose yourself. That night, they sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket, listening to the rain tap against the roof. No dramatic endings, no final page. Just a people learning how to stay. And in her heart, Emma finally believed something she'd never dared to before, that her quietness wasn't a flaw. It was her gift, that sometimes the greatest love stories aren't the ones shouted from rooftops, but the ones whispered over late-night tea and folded into handwritten letters tucked inside forgotten books. And that yes, even the girl who had never been kissed could one day find herself in the kind of story that doesn't just end in love, but begins there too.